They told us that the cities of the past were modest, fragile, the product of patient hands chiseling stone with primitive tools. They told us tales of villages that grew slowly into towns, and towns that blossomed into cities, each generation stacking one more layer of progress upon the last. But when we walk through the remnants of those so-called ancient cities, when we stand before structures carved with such precision that even our modern machines hesitate before attempting to replicate them, the question becomes unavoidable. Who built these things? And perhaps more unsettling, where did they go? The first cracks in the official narrative do not appear in dusty scrolls or forgotten chronicles. They appear right under our feet, hidden in the foundations of the cities we think we know. Look closely at an old building in any European downtown. You'll notice something strange and deeply out of place. Doors that open directly into the earth, windows buried halfway below the sidewalk, entire floors swallowed by layers of soil that no earthquake or seasonal flood could have placed there naturally. Historians insist this is simply cultural layer, the slow accumulation of time. But time does not move in sudden vertical leaps. Time does not bury cities overnight. Yet the evidence stands, silent and stubborn. And if we lift our gaze from the buried streets to the skyline, the mystery deepens. Cathedrals that stretch upward like frozen lightning, towers of stone so mathematically perfect that not a single line falters, arches balanced with a precision that defies the toolkits attributed to the builders of their era. We are asked to believe that such masterpieces were erected by populations who could barely read, who worked by candlelight, who lacked the machinery to lift even a fraction of the stones required. They carved and lifted and aligned millions of tons of material, and we are told they did so with ropes and wooden scaffolds, guided only by instinct and persistence. But the stones do not lie. They carry the truth in their symmetry, in their polish, in their impossible endurance. These structures were not built by amateurs. They were engineered. Yet if the official version collapses under the weight of its own contradiction, a much darker question rises from the rubble. If the builders were not the people we see in paintings and manuscripts, then who were they? And what happened to them? To find the first clues, we turn to the strange silence captured in the earliest photographs of the 19th century. Vast boulevards, monumental buildings, plazas large enough to host thousands, yet all of them eerily empty. A city without citizens, streets without footprints, a civilization waiting for inhabitants who had yet to arrive. It is as if the photographers had stepped into a world recently abandoned, a world whose previous occupants had vanished without a trace. Stranger still is what came next. In the very same decades these empty cities were photographed, an unprecedented wave of orphanhood swept across the world. Thousands of institutions appeared almost overnight, massive, ornate buildings capable of housing not dozens, but thousands of children. Where did so many children come from? Why were their origins so vague, so unrecorded, so easily attributed to vague plagues and unnamed tragedies? And why do these two mysteries, empty cities and children without parents, appear so closely intertwined in time? Perhaps the answer lies not in tragedy, but in replacement. And yet even this is not the origin of the story. To truly understand the enormity of the mystery, we must go further back, beyond photographs, beyond newspapers, back to a time when the only record of the world was painted by hand. In canvases from the 17th and 18th centuries, we see ordinary Europeans, farmers, merchants, travelers, moving casually among ruins so colossal, so intricate, that they dwarf the people like ants scurrying beneath the pillars of forgotten gods. These ruins were not cracked or eroded beyond recognition. They were intact, functional, recently abandoned. The artists painted them not as sacred relics but as everyday scenery, backgrounds to mundane life. And this introduces the most unsettling possibility of all, that the world of giants once existed not thousands of years ago, but merely centuries ago. A civilization of immense capacity, immense reach, immense knowledge, wiped away in a single event whose traces we have been trained not to see. But every ruin whispers the same truth. Every buried floor, every oversized column, every deserted boulevard photographed in impossible silence points toward a past that did not fade gently into the present. It was interrupted. Something happened, something powerful enough to erase a civilization advanced enough to build the impossible. Now the image becomes clearer. The precision of the stone suggests technological mastery. The global spread of the ruins suggests planetary reach. The abrupt disappearance of the builders suggests catastrophe, and the sudden emergence of millions of children with no recorded parents suggests repopulation. This is where our investigation truly begins, because before we can answer the question of who built these impossible structures, we must first understand the event that wiped them out. And the deeper we look into this silent, forgotten catastrophe, the more the official timeline begins to tremble, like a scaffolding too weak to support the weight of truth. To understand who built these impossible structures, we must first understand how they vanish. And for that, we must return to the quiet testimonies of the artists, those painters who, unknowingly, documented the aftermath of a disaster the official history refuses to acknowledge. Their canvases are not fantasies. They are scenes captured with almost photographic precision. Yet what they show is not a peaceful world, but a wounded one. Look closely, and you begin to notice something deeply unsettling. Across Europe, in Italy, France, Russia, the Balkans, artists painted cities suffocated under vast layers of mud and clay, not ruins half swallowed by time, but structures inundated suddenly, violently, as if an avalanche of earth had swept across entire landscapes and then solidified. Buildings buried up to their roofs, streets turned into trenches, valleys filled with a material that looks less like soil and more like the residue of a single, unimaginable event. Historians try to explain this away with the idea of cultural layers, the slow buildup of soil over centuries. But these deposits are not slow. They are abrupt. They follow no pattern of natural accumulation. And the most telling detail is always the same. People in the paintings walk with long poles, probing the ground as if it might swallow them whole. They are not strolling. They are surviving. They are assessing damage. They are navigating a world recently transformed into a maze of wet, unstable earth. What kind of disaster buries cities from above? Water rises from below. Earthquakes tear from beneath. But this descends. It falls. It suffocates. And as we compare canvases from different regions, an unmistakable pattern emerges. The mud does not flow like river silt. It falls like rain, thick, heavy, murderous. Entire fortresses on hilltops are covered from the top down. The highest roofs vanish first. The lowest levels remain somehow untouched inside, swallowed only after the weight above collapses. Something came from the sky. If this were mere myth, a poetic metaphor, the evidence would end with the painting. But it does not. Because in the scorching deserts of Central Asia, in the ancient city of Ka, the same signature of destruction appears. Only here, the evidence is not artistic. It is physical. It can be touched. The city walls of Ka are massive, 5 meters thick, built of baked brick. And yet the southern wall looks as though something colossal struck it, not from siege, not from war, but from an elemental force. The damage is wild, asymmetrical, chaotic, as if a tidal wave of earth had crashed into it with unstoppable momentum. But the most disturbing evidence lies not in the wall, but beneath it, compacted within the hardened layers of clay. Human bone, not buried neatly, not arranged as in a cemetery. They protrude from the earth at strange angles, fragments of ribs and femurs embedded within the geological layers, as if they had been swept up with the very material that buried the city. These are not remains of the long dead. These are the remains of those who were alive when it happened, caught, consumed, frozen in the moment of catastrophe. A slow accumulation cannot embed bodies this way. Only a sudden, overwhelming force can fuse human remains directly into layers of earth. And this changes everything, because it means the paintings were not exaggeration. They were not symbolic. They were accurate records of a cataclysm that reshaped continents, suffocating entire populations in an instant. A disaster of such scale that even now, centuries later, its traces remain under our modern cities, hiding in basements, sealed behind walls, buried beneath pavement. But the physical evidence is only half the story. The other half lies in silence, deep, strategic silence. When we examine archives, chronicles, letters from the period that supposedly witnessed these structures being built, we find almost nothing. No detailed records of construction, no blueprints, no logistical plans, no accounts of how millions of tons of stone were quarried, shaped, and transported. Entire nations supposedly erected monumental buildings without leaving behind a single document explaining how they achieved such miracles with primitive tools. This silence is not accidental. It is structural. It is protective. And now we begin to see why. A civilization capable of constructing megalithic cities on a global scale, capable of shaping stone with near-perfect precision, capable of raising towers and cathedrals with mathematical mastery far beyond their supposed era. Such a civilization could not simply fade. It would have left traces everywhere, in metallurgy, in city planning, in population pattern, in written archives, yet what we find instead is a sudden rupture, a missing chapter, a gap so wide that historians attempt to bridge it with tales of dark ages, of lost skills, of centuries where humanity inexplicably forgot how to build what their ancestors supposedly created. But no civilization forgets mastery. Mastery can be destroyed. It cannot be forgotten. So what happened to the builders? The evidence points to a single scenario. They were wiped out. Not slowly, not gradually, but in one overwhelming event. The paintings, the buried streets, the orphaned children, the strange emptiness captured in early photographs, they are all fragments of the same truth. A global reset, a silencing of an entire generation of human knowledge. And once we accept this, a far more haunting question emerges. If the world we inherited was built by a civilization erased suddenly and violently, then who rebuilt the world afterward? Who repopulated the empty cities? Who taught the next generation the stories we now call history? And who rewrote the timeline? The answers are not in monuments, they are in the voids between them. To uncover who constructed the impossible, we must investigate those who arrived afterward, the ones who found the world already built, the ones who inherited not knowledge, but ruins. And the trail leads us back to those silent, ghostly photographs of the 19th century, the ones showing vast, empty cities that seem to be waiting for inhabitants who never show up. These images are more than historical artifacts. They are confession. A metropolis without people is not a city, it is a stage, a place recently vacated, recently reclaimed, undergoing a transformation so profound that the presence of its original inhabitants is only a memory. The wide boulevards stretch outward with mathematical precision. The buildings align with the logic of master architects, not of scattered villagers. And yet, where are the crowds? Where are the workers? Where are the families? The horses? The markets? Nothing. It is as if humanity abruptly disappeared, and then, slowly, cautiously, reappeared in small numbers, wandering through streets built for millions. And here the puzzle begins to take shape. At the exact same moment that these empty cities were photographed, the world experienced something unprecedented, an explosion of orphanhood. It was not local, it was not regional, it was global. Orphanages in Europe, Russia, America, and Australia expanded at an impossible rate. They did not house dozens of children, they housed thousands. Some resembled palaces, some resembled barracks. All of them sprang up as if responding to an invisible demand. But where did so many children come from? Wars existed, yes. Epidemics existed. But even combined, they could not produce the numbers recorded. The sheer scale defies explanation, unless we consider the possibility that the world had recently lost an entire adult population, a generation gone, a void waiting to be filled. Now imagine the aftermath of such a catastrophe. Empty homes, empty streets, empty infrastructures, a world built but uninhabited. You would need people, quickly, a workforce, a population, a generation without ties to the past, without memories of what came before, without stories that contradicted the new narrative. Who better than children? Children do not question what they are taught. Children do not remember parents who may have witnessed the event that erased the builders. Children provide a clean slate, a malleable population ready to inherit a world without knowing who truly shaped it. And suddenly, the silent photographs make sense. The cities were not built by 19th century hands. They were inherited by 19th century feet, inherited by orphans raised to repopulate a world whose true creators were gone. But there is another clue, one even stranger. In many of these early photographs, the facades of the buildings appear aged, not decades old, centuries old, yet they are surrounded by freshly excavated earth, as if the cities were not built, but uncovered, as if the new inhabitants were not constructing their world, but digging it out from beneath layers of clay left by the cataclysm. And indeed, That is exactly what they were doing. Steam excavators appear in photographs of cities like Seattle and Kansas City, tearing through hills of earth that engulfed entire buildings up to their second floors. Temporary railways were installed along city streets so that mountains of soil could be carried away by train. In some cases, pressurized water cannons were used to liquefy the earth, washing it down slopes like slurry. These were not routine urban improvements. These were archaeological recoveries on an industrial scale. The new inhabitants did not build the cities, they uncovered them. And this brings us to the most important revelation so far. If a civilization advanced enough to construct such monumental architecture was buried under a sudden deluge of earth, and if the survivors, or replacement, had to excavate entire urban centers, then the cities we consider old are not old at all. They are recent discoveries. They were found. They were claimed. Their origins were forgotten or deliberately erased, because whoever took control after the catastrophe needed the world to believe a new story, a simpler story, a story in which the past is primitive, the present is enlightened, and the future belongs to the new order rising from the ashes. But the stones remember, the ruins remember, the buried floors, the oversized doors, the empty streets, the waves of orphaned children. They all whisper the same forbidden truth. We are not the builders of our world. We are merely its second occupant. And as we continue this investigation, we will begin to see the outlines of the vanished civilization more clearly, not through documents or chronicles, but through the architecture itself, through the impossible metallurgy, through the engineering too advanced for its supposed time. Their fingerprints are everywhere, if we know how to look. Their disappearance was sudden, but their legacy was not erased. It was inherited by those who never understood it. If the world we inhabit was repopulated by those who did not build it, then our next task is to examine the fingerprints left behind by the true architects, and nowhere does their shadow loom larger than in the structures themselves, constructions so advanced, so mathematically precise, that they seem to mock the explanations offered by conventional history. Let us begin with the monuments of metal. The story we are told is simple. The 19th century was an age of steam and smoke, an era in which ironworkers hammered their way toward modernity. But the numbers betray the truth. Consider the Crystal Palace in London, a colossal glass and iron structure supposedly erected in 1851, designed not by an engineer or a metallurgist, but by a gardener who, according to historians, suddenly produced architectural calculations rivaling the sophistication of the 20th century. The building required thousands of tons of high-quality cast iron, each piece shaped with precision that should have been impossible for the metallurgy of the era. Where were the vast mines needed to produce the iron? Where were the foundries capable of manufacturing thousands of identical components? Where are the records of the logistical chaos that would have overtaken London as hundreds of horse-drawn carriages delivered multi-ton beams into the heart of the city? Such records do not exist because such events never happened. The structure did not require elaborate transportation because it was not built from scratch. It was assembled from remnants of a civilization whose industrial capacity dwarfed anything the 19th century claimed to possess, and when this anomaly became too obvious to ignore, it conveniently burned. A structure made of iron and glass, materials that do not burn, was allegedly consumed by a fire so intense that the metal melted into streams. To believe the official story is to believe in miracle, not the kind performed by saints, but by physics itself. The Eiffel Tower presents a similar impossibility. 18,000 perfectly measured components, each drilled with flawless alignment, assembled without a single misfit piece, at a time when standardization did not exist, and when each workshop used its own measurements. The miracle becomes even more absurd when we consider that these pieces supposedly arrived from scattered factories across France and slid together like parts of a machine designed in a single unified system. Because that is exactly what they were. These were not scattered workshops improvising metalwork. They were remnants of a technological infrastructure we refuse to acknowledge. The narrative of 19th century engineering genius exists only because we inherited structures too advanced to credit to any known era, and so we forcibly inserted them into a timeline that cannot accommodate them. But the mystery deepens when we move from metal to stone. Cathedrals with vaults suspended like frozen waves, arches whose weight distribution obeys complex mathematical laws supposedly unknown at the time, walls of fitted stone so precise that modern engineers struggle to explain them without invoking tools far beyond rope, pulley, and chisel. Historians insist these structures took centuries to complete, but this explanation collapses under scrutiny. A project spanning 200 years would require continuity of design across generations that had no shared plans, no standardized tools, and no institutional memory capable of preserving the precision required. And yet the cathedrals rise uniformly, flawlessly, without the slightest deviation in alignment, as though they were constructed not across centuries, but in a single orchestrated effort. And what of the labor force? The official narrative imagines armies of uneducated workers, men who lacked even proper footwear, erecting marvels of geometry and physics. Yet these same workers could not have carved a single intricate column, much less a cathedral. Geometry is not guessed. Precision is not improvised. These buildings are not primitive. They are perfect, and perfection leaves no doubt. This was not the work of peasants. This was not the work of medieval guilds struggling with hand tools. This was the work of a civilization whose mastery of energy, materials, and engineering has been erased so thoroughly that today their achievements are attributed to men who could not have reproduced them even in dreams. But the most disturbing contradiction lies not in the buildings themselves, but in what surrounds them. In many cities, we find monumental stone structures next to flimsy wooden houses, magnificent stone halls beside crude shacks. It is as if someone found abandoned palaces and simply moved in, without understanding or caring who built them. The disparity is so vast that it is impossible to reconcile the two as products of the same culture. This pattern repeats across continents. Ancient aqueducts towering above mud huts, colonnades flanking dirt streets, stone bridges capable of surviving centuries beside fragile wooden walkways. Everywhere we look, we find evidence of a population living in the ruins of a civilization far beyond their own. They were not the builders, they were the squatters. And when we combine this with the buried streets, the mudfalls from the sky, the bones embedded in hardened clay, and the orphaned children repopulating empty metropolises, the shape of the truth emerges. Humanity did not progress linearly. It restarted, and the world we inherited was never meant for us. We do not understand its proportions, its materials, its technology, or its purpose. We live in an architectural fossil, a tomb carved by a forgotten hand. But the final piece of the mystery lies not in architecture or metallurgy. It lies in the one domain where lies cannot hide: numbers, population numbers, growth rates, the mathematics of human existence. Because once we examine the mathematics, the official timeline collapses completely. And that is where our final chapter begins. To uncover who built the impossible, we must confront one final barrier: the arithmetic of history. Because while stone can be repurposed and metal can be melted, numbers are incorruptible. And the moment we examine the population records, the official chronology shatters like glass. Every civilization requires people, millions of them, to build cities, sustain agriculture, support labor, drive innovation. Yet when we trace back the population statistics provided by official history, something astonishing happens. The numbers collapse. The world of the past shrinks into a demographic impossibility. Take England. In the early 19th century, its population was roughly 9 million. 2 centuries later, it surpassed 65 million. This exponential growth is documented, measured, undeniable. Now reverse the curve. Apply the same rate backward. In the so-called Middle Ages, England's population would approach zero. The math does not support bustling cities, vast armies, or monumental construction projects. The math supports emptiness. The same is true for France, Italy, Spain, Russia. Their populations, when traced backward using their own growth rates, fall to levels incompatible with advanced civilization. Entire continents reduced to scarcely populated landscapes. And yet we are told that these underpopulated societies built cities on a scale that even today would strain our infrastructure. The numbers do not lie. The timeline does. And this discrepancy is not a minor error. It is a mathematical impossibility. You cannot build cathedrals with no population. You cannot quarry millions of tons of stone with a workforce the size of a modern small town. You cannot sustain the logistics of monumental construction when your entire society could barely feed itself. And so the official history asks us to believe in miracles. Miracles of manpower, miracles of technology, miracles of capacity that defy physics, engineering, and mathematics. The truth is simpler. The official timeline is wrong. It has been stretched, compressed, rearranged, and rewritten to conceal an event so devastating that it erased the builders and left only their cities behind. And that event was global. The mudfalls documented by painters, the buried streets uncovered by excavators, the empty cities photographed in eerie silence, the sudden appearance of millions of orphans, the impossible buildings that do not match the tools of their time. These are not isolated anomalies. They are fragments of a single catastrophe, a reset, a purge, a rewriting, a civilization advanced enough to build with stone as easily as we build with steel. A civilization that mastered energy sources we no longer comprehend. A civilization that spanned continents, leaving behind uniform architectural signatures across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. A civilization that vanished suddenly, leaving no survivors old enough to preserve its memory. And into this vacuum stepped a new humanity, small in number, fragile, orphaned not only of parents, but of history. They inherited a world that was too large for them, too complex, too magnificent. They repopulated it, claimed it, rewrote it. They built wooden houses beside stone towers, humble markets beneath colossal facades, new stories atop old bones. And over time, they forgot, or rather, they were encouraged to forget. Because the greatest secret of the modern world is not what we have discovered, but what we have inherited. The cities we live in were not built by us. The cathedrals we admire were not designed by our ancestors. The colossal ruins scattered across continents are not relics of primitive eras, but remnants of a world more advanced than our own. We are not the apex of civilization. We are its aftermath. And now, as we follow the trails of buried stone, melted metal, erased populations, and repurposed cities, one realization becomes inescapable. The question is no longer, who built these impossible structures? The real question, the one that shakes the foundations of everything we think we know, is far more unsettling. Why were they erased? Because if a civilization powerful enough to construct the impossible once ruled this world, then something powerful enough to destroy them still casts its shadow over us. And the echoes of that destruction are etched into every stone foundation, every buried floor, every cathedral dome standing too perfect to belong to its time. We inherited their world, but we did not inherit their knowledge. We live in the ruins of giants, and their silence is the loudest warning humanity has ever ignored.